Welcome back. This is Tim Harris, and this is another edition of the World's Greatest Agent Interview Series. And today we welcome longtime friend Leo Pareja to our interview series. And Leo is somebody who has got a very dynamic background in real estate. In addition to that, he's also happens to be the CEO of some little company you guys may have heard of called eXp Realty. And I originally interviewed Leo. It was in 2013, which is pretty funny. Before I think our podcast even officially launched, it was just on a webinar. So Leo, welcome back. It's been a while.
It's been a while. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I love your backdrop, by the way. It reminds me of Big Sur, California. So very beautiful. So let's just jump right in. I mean, so you've been give folks a little bit of background on your real estate background. I reviewed the notes from 13 years ago or 11 years ago. And I remember that at the time you were the #1 Keller Williams agent in the world, correct?
I that was one of the titles I collected along the way. So in 2010, I was ranked the #1 agent, but in probably like a 4 or 5 year period, I was in the top 3 to 5 of Keller Williams. Back in the day, competing with like Chris Heller and Russell Rhodes and several other folks that I still count as dear friends.
Why does it matter, Leo? Because I'm sure you'll agree it matters. Why does it matter that somebody who's going to lead a real estate company actually sold real estate? And I deal with that in our industry too, that you're going to hire a real estate coach, they sure as hell better sold real estate before.
Yeah, I think it's a surprising in a bad way that it's novel that I am one. I still hold a real estate license, and I think out of the publicly traded companies, I'm the only one who ever sold real estate, let alone still have one. But I actually I'm quite proud and lean into the fact that if you look at our whole C-suite, it's made up mostly real estate practitioners who then took on other experiences and roles that qualify them to be in executive roles. But it's just a different conversation, right? So, for example, Wendy Forsythe, who just joined us as a CMO, and I were with some agents in Texas, 2 calls before yours, and they just said something that we're like, oh, I get it, perfect. Let's see how we roll this out. And there's not a meeting about a committee to discuss if we should vote on this. It's like, look, tactically, does this resonate? Does this make sense? Does it make your life easier? And I also like to explain to folks, when we say no, I can actually articulate why, right? It's like, hey, that's a great idea, but it doesn't scale. It's not compliant in another state. The no's are just as important as the yeses. And having walked a mile in your shoes, to me is the whole job, right? Because I describe eXp as a platform to allow real estate entrepreneurs to build whatever size dream they want. And that doesn't mean that everybody strives to be doing 1,000 transactions, multi-state expansion business. If you want to do 10, 15, 20 deals in your market with sphere of influence, that's awesome and probably more profitable in some instances. And we are a platform that's agnostic to what it is, the business model should be, and we're there to support it. And by paying you faster, by answering first level support questions faster, by giving you broker access even on a weekend like this one that's a holiday weekend, and still having your calls returned. Because I lead from the fact that we are a real estate company that is tech enabled and not the other way around. And I just want to be in business with the smartest folks in the space, and making sure that I try to answer a question every single day. How do I make it being at eXp better than not? Because agents have the choice of who they associate with.
Yeah, that's really well stated. It was also interesting that you said there's a difference between being a tech company and being an existing company that's trying to adapt to tech, because you can definitely see that in the marketplace when it's a mindset. But I really would like to drill down a little bit more, because I think that the differentiator of you having sold not just real estate, but having sold literally millions, thousands of homes, that really is hugely important, because it rewires the way you think about not just individual agents, but also people that, agents that are entrepreneurial that want to grow their teams. And I don't even know how to describe it, because this is all I've never known. This is all you've ever known. You got into real estate when you were 19, I was 23. And the reality of it is that it does rewire your brain. It does cause you to think differently. It does cause you to think more in terms of, really the opportunistic thinking that's necessary, but at the same time, you really do have to be thinking systematically. You have to be thinking in terms of your own CFO and the rest of it. And that's not something you can teach somebody unless they've actually been there, done that. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said for that. And I'm going to say this too. When I'm doing calls with you, I noticed that people can sense right away without you even telling them that you've been in real estate before. And I know they feel that way with Julie and I too when we're in a coaching environment. So that's just not to be underestimated. And I hopefully eXp is going to lead the way. And Glenn Sanford certainly was a very successful real estate agent too. So hopefully this will turn the tides of a lot of these more, I think, maybe bureaucratically laden brokerages, but we'll see. Where do you think eXp is having its greatest challenges right now, and on almost the backside of the Burnett issue with regards to buyer agent commissions? Where did the
So
next?
yeah, so I've done a lot of these calls, and especially in the last 30 days, and whether it's Wall Street analysts or the media or our agents, and I'm singularly focused in 2023 to make, or 2024, to make sure that we're operationally ready for the shift. I can't emphasize enough how significant I think this could be for small to mid-sized companies. And again, to me, it's very tactical, and to your point of where it kind of comes across that we actually know what we're talking about, right? So there is a rule coming, and my immediate question is, great, who, what, when, and where? Like, how is it going to be enforced? Who is going to be the enforcing body? What are the penalties if you don't follow the rules? Am I expected as the broker to enforce them? Is this a fine, or is this like suspension from the MLS? There's all these super tactical things that I know are going to vary state to state, because some states already have very specific rules on their books about buyer representation, which is completely different than disclosure, right? And I think agents get confused because they say, "Oh, I have to do buyer agency disclosure." I'm like, that's a unilateral form of communication, versus another one is an employment contract with two parties and meeting of the minds that's enforceable in a court, right? So right now, my only concern is, are our agents operationally ready from an education standpoint? And that's starting with being able to articulate to the consumers, both on the buyer and seller side, what this means to them and how to navigate it and what's available to them and how does it affect them, to then having the actual marketing pieces, like, hey, you don't have a solid buyer presentation, this is your template, start here, insert your information here, become well versed in what this means for you and your performance. I like to tell agents, treat your buyers like you treat your sellers. And that's the mantra I've been preaching since this news broke. And what that translates to is, as listing agents, we've had all this behavior and all these scripts already where we say things like, you list a price ratio, your days on market, all that fun stuff. That is second nature to anybody who's been in this industry for a little bit. But agents need to become aware and very well versed in what that translates on the buy side. Like, how often do you win in multiple contract situations? What is the average percent concession you are able to negotiate on behalf of your buyers from a seller? And then truly be able to articulate the amount of steps. You and I both know from being a practitioner that being a buyer's agent is actually much harder than being a listing agent, in hours, in time and commitment, probably on the emotional roller coaster side. And so, agents earn what they negotiate and get paid for. And so it's going to be on us to help them articulate. And if they want to try different ways of the commission, whether it's a flat fee or any other, we're here to support you as long as it's legal, ethical, and within the rules of engagement. And what I'm predicting quite a bit of experimentation as the shift happens. And if we were to fast forward the movie 2 years from now, it'll be super straightforward. We'll have a new normal, what that looks like, and someone getting their license 2 years from now won't actually understand how we did it before. Like, anytime there's been a large shift. But I don't want to underemphasize that I think this shift is going to create a huge opportunity for companies like ours, because I think we will be the net surviving type of model. Because if the cheese is moved at scale for small to mid-sized brokers who already had either razor thin margins or margins that were below zero, which they've been experiencing for years, and we have the size and scale to support shifts, whether it's creating paperwork, broker support, and all that stuff that comes with it to be operationally prepared. We rolled out our first version of the buyer agency agreement, I think within 14 days. And we're, a little over 60 days into the NAR settlement being announced, and we're already working on V2, right? And because we have more agents and we do more transactions than everybody, I think we have the greatest feedback loop there is in the industry. So I think we'll be able to lead the way with a with a spirit of curiosity, right? I've heard from lots of my friends in other companies where their leadership is saying we're not allowed to talk about it, and their managers, and again, that's the tail wagging the dog with the lawyers because they're scared. But at the end of the day, we're here to support agents, and Glenn and I are aligned in the sense that even if it's controversial or difficult, we're still not going to shy away from answering these questions and being able to answer them, because I think that's what agents are looking for right now. A sound voice that's calm and not overreacting, but also being proactive and not waiting to be reactive.
Yeah, I agree with what you said at the start there with regards to the fact that it's just going to become a normal way of doing business. Just like when you go on a listing appointment, you send a pre-listing pack first. You pre-qualify the buyer. Now you're going to send the pre-listing or the pre-buyer pack, whatever the heck it's going to be called, and then you're going to have a more formal presentation. It's the exact way you've always done it on the listing side of things will just be done on the buyer side of things. There's been a lot of prognosticators about they're guessing that there's going to be some sort of big exodus of agents. What are you experiencing in eXp, and what's your opinion of that?
Yeah, I think opinions and guesses are exactly that. And the interesting thing to me is I've heard them range completely, right? From 30% destruction, like 30% commission destruction and 70% of the agents leaving, to half a basis point, right? And the answer is we don't know. We will see when it gets here. My personal opinion is, if you look at NAR stats, not our stats, but NAR stats, I think in 2023, which was a super low year from a transaction standpoint, something like 57% of agents sold zero homes. So my guess is those folks that sold zero homes and still maintain a license with us or anybody else and pay MLS dues, are doing it because it's aspirational. Real estate is, in my opinion, an aspirational business where people are maybe start part-time, hoping to get full-time and kind of change the course of their family's good fortune. And so I don't know that people are going to leave at scale, because at the end of the day, the number of transactions isn't going to change, right? We're still going to hopefully get back to a more regular transaction volume of 5.5, 6 million homes. 4 is artificially low or historically low, and 7 is artificially high or historically high, where we experienced that in 2021 and 2026 or 2006. But if you look at household formation, inventory availability, if we get to a balanced market, homeowners and home buyers choose at a disproportionate percentage to hire a professional. And we just said, hey, this is what happens on the seller side. So for all the prognosticators to the downside, I would, again, the answer is still who knows, and we will see. But if I look at the data on what's happened on listings, for decades we've had multiple different forms of selling homes. You've been able to hire, and a consumer today can go to Zillow, choose for sale by owner, and show it to the largest portal of eyeballs, and not hire any agents, buyer side or listing side representation. And Zillow puts out a seller report that's really detailed every year. And I have not seen the 2023 one. I only found the 2022 one for a call I did the other day. But there's some really interesting stats in there. Their data said that 36% of all sellers attempt to go FSBO, and only 11% execute that way. So to me, it's 2/3 of the people try it, realize it's painful, and hire a professional. And if we flip the net execution number, 89% of people still choose representation, right? And there's all kinds of statistics on how that execution is substantially higher than the fee they paid from a net basis. And I just, I feel like people overcomplicate things and say and think in the they, and overcomplicate how they perceive the market. And I always invite everybody to think of themselves as a sample size of one. Like how does Tim consume information or services? And what I think is going to happen is there's going to be some people who read headlines and may attempt to do it themselves. And after 3-4 weeks of trying to schedule showings directly with listing agents and coordinate open houses and lose multiple bid situations because they didn't know what they were doing and didn't have representation, whether it's a listing agent, a lawyer, a flat fee, whatever it is, right? I think through frustration, some folks will ultimately still go back to a trusted professional who provides the value of service they're willing to pay for. right? And I'm not opining on percentages or what one is better than the other. But when I look at what's happened on the seller side, right? Agents can go limited service to no service and even get them into an MLS for a couple $100, right? There's all kinds of companies that do that at volume. But if you look at the data, and also the other thing that agents would steer by commission offer, the data from the MLSs, and Bright MLS just put out a very specific monitored information that agents never searched by co-ops. They were just searching by 3-bedroom, 2-bath, price point, geography, because this is all keystroke recorded. So again, I don't agree with what's come out of a lot of this stuff, but life is 10% what happens and 90% how you react to it, right? So I say this often, it's like, look, every time there's a change in the market, and I've lived through a bunch of them, I think agents have a choice to say, okay, this is the profession I've chosen. This is how I earn money. With this change, significant or insignificant, do I still think that the opportunity is worth the effort? And then you make the decision to stay in the industry and work within the rules of engagement that are available to you, or the market conditions in transactions or interest rates or supply or demand and all that stuff. And I personally think that's still one of the most amazing opportunities for entrepreneurs from a investment to return ratio on the planet, right? If you're going to build tech, you got to raise a lot of money. It's super expensive. You know about this, right? If you're going to open brick and mortar service companies or, long-term leases and overhead of human support versus real estate allows this very sequential lead with revenue model that allows you to provide for you and your family if you so choose to do so.
Yeah. So Warren Buffett said something fairly recently. He said, when asked about all the commission sharing lawsuits, he was referring to all the houses he's personally bought and sold. And he said he's never once negotiated on the commission. And the essence of it was that, the reason that the system exists the way it does is because it works, and so.
Yeah. No, and I get asked all the time, and I was just on stage at Inman and I was asked, what do you think the fee will be? And I said, I think the fee will be what the fee is. And what I mean by that, I wasn't being coy and not trying to answer the question, is a service is what the service is. And the market always sets the price, right? Like if I were to ask you to do something for $8 and you're like, no, I'm willing to only do it for X. What capitalism and free enterprise allows is for the market, a provider of a service and a consumer of a service, to align and create a market value. And so if people were to try to do it for too cheap, those people tend to go out of business. And again, this is across any industry or in any economy. And the provider who delivers the best service and time normally ends up setting what, a real margin is. And that's how everything works.
It is. And yeah, it'll be interesting too, as the, politics sort themselves out, because a lot of this stuff is, political, and, the additional litigation will inevitably come from all of this. How this sorts out, to your point, 2 years from now, who knows? Even 12 months from now, it'll be much more simplified. And really, the buyer agent model wouldn't have been around for as long as it was if consumers didn't want to use a buyer's agent, to your point as well. And people,
if people go back,
yeah,
if people go back far enough, it was because it was consumer friendly that it was created.
Yeah, exactly.
Sub agency didn't protect the buyer, and that's why buyer agency was created. So
let me share this with you. You probably know this already, but in Canada, in Ontario, if you are you represent the seller as a listing agent, John Walkinshaw told me about this. He said that they actually have an addendum to their listing contract, that if a buyer shows up, wants to purchase the house, and is not represented, the seller will actually pay, the listing agent more money, because now he's having to do both sides of the transaction. And so,
no, and I talk about this. So this is not something I'm afraid to talk about. We are changing our listing agreement to specifically state that, right? This is the service fee for the seller side, but part of the education, which I mentioned earlier, if an agent is at a listing appointment, I think it should be something to the effect of, before the settlement, this is how the world worked. After the settlement, these are the new rules. In the event that somebody shows up and says, I choose to be completely unrepresented, and I want to buy this house, I have questions for you, Mr. Seller, of like, what services do you want me to render, right? And what's the compensation for that? Because I just went over the seller side representation, but if there is an unrepresented buyer who, I don't encourage dual agency, but wants like ministerial acts to get the transaction closed, and the agent should be well versed on the distinction, meaning that whole buyer presentation I just covered with, what the value proposition is and the 111 things that a buyer agent typically does for a buyer should also be part of the listing presentation, in my opinion now, right? Where the education needs to be on both sides too, where when you're explaining to a seller that there could be an ask for seller concession to cover buyer representation commission, I would educate the seller as to what that means. And, to say, hey, when I work with buyers, this is the presentation I show buyers.
Yeah, I agree. It all makes sense. And just taking a half step back as far as this big agent exodus, that's not going to happen either. Julie and I researched it as far back into the NAR records as we could and found some other stuff that was even before the NAR records. And anytime there's been an economic situation like this, or any kind of essentially a time where people had to create more sources of income, we'll go back to the late 70s as a good example. Guess what they do? They get real estate licenses. And so what we're seeing, and inflation is causing, I think, more people to want to get licenses. And it's also kind of funny that you said what you did about the fact that, being an agent is aspirational, because I'm 54 and you're 41, right? When I was growing up, becoming a real estate agent was the fallback to the fallback to the fallback to the fallback after the other thing didn't work. It wasn't.
Well, I say it aspirational in the sense of the things I hear, the reasons I hear people get into real estate. They want more income. They want flexibility. Yeah. Because, I think TV has really changed the perception of the agent, and not to debate for good or bad, but in general terms, everyone I meet who wants to get into real estate is because they want flexibility and they want unlimited income. And the funny thing I always laugh is everyone who does it at a very high level is not flexibility, make their own calendar. Like none of that really exists, right? The people who do great at this business come in and treat it like a business, meaning they're meticulous with time blocking and repetition and consistency and all that fun stuff.
Well, but it is also aspirational from a perception of status too. I mean, we have Frederick Eklund that's scheduled to be on here not too long from now, and and the Bravo TV guys and all the rest of it. And it has become something that people aspire to do. So it's kind of fascinating to see this younger generation come into the industry with maybe an inflated sense of really, not realizing the work it takes, but it's completely different than it was 20 years ago. So I'm like you, I'm very optimistic about the future of not just, real estate in general, because the other thing you want to look at is when people are asking questions about like housing crash, all these, these folks that like to go down that path. You just look purely at the numbers of people that want to buy a house, the number of millennials, the number of people that are just the sheer millions of, humans that are going to be making more humans. They're all going to want to buy real estate. And then combine that with the fact that owning real estate, I mean, Julie has these numbers all memorized, but the average homeowner, the average American that owns a home, I don't remember the multiple, but is massively more wealthy than a lifelong renter. The winds are at our back in an industry, and we're just dealing some choppy waters. That's what it feels like to me. So let me ask you a question with regards to, you said brokers and teams. And this, back in the 90s, you could have a team, and even related to probably about 2005 or six, and you could run buyer's agents, you could do all the rest of it, and you could make a decent margin as a team leader. And that all started to get eviscerated. Why do you think that's true? And I'm going to grab the easy answers, okay? One, agents were demanding more in commission, and in some markets, there was commission compression. In addition to that, why do you think some of these teams and these brokerages have become really, net losers?
So I think everything's in cycles, right? And so, I've seen what I call the expansion of the super team for 20 years, right? So in 2002, when I got licensed, the biggest teams in the country were 10, 20 people doing 200 million or 200 units. And now they're 2,000 units with 200 people. And I think, as commission splits continue to get more beneficial to the agent, and I'm talking about from like the 70s to now, brokers are left to do more with less, right? And so the team became kind of the new value proposition of the brokerage of the 50s or 60s or 70s, right? Where Central 21, Coldwell Banker, and even Keller Williams started. But I think where I see folks get tripped up, and I talk about this a lot even with big teams, is you have to lead with profitability, and you need to focus on what the ultimate goal is. Is it units or is it net margin? And so I think as a world, we live in and I talk about this concept that I learned while building my last company, which is painkillers versus vitamins. The vitamin analogy in real estate is to do the long-term, not fun part, right? Which is choose your path, but it's prospecting, sphere of influence, farm, like the long-term play, which will result in repeat organic business that doesn't have a high barrier of entry with expense. And the flip side of that, to me, the painkiller would be that ready, will, enable lead, which is a referral from a institutional source of sorts, without naming names, who charges a very large referral fee. And we've actually seen that referral fee go from 25% and in some cases all the way to 50% now. Right. So I talk a lot about
hold on. There's a platform that I know, that I think I know what you're talking about. I thought there were it's going up to from 40 to 50%. Oh, wow.
And not across the board, and just maybe price point and geography, and not just one. There's two or three of them. Some of them, in my information, have kind of learned that at 50 they're kind of breaking things, and maybe they got to be at 40. But the point of the comment is not what the actual fee is; it's the fact that you're not in control, right? So if you build a business on a third party anything, you are subject to somebody else changing their mind about their business model, and you're just a part of the process versus the one who creates the process. And again, not good or bad. Maybe it's a great way to scale your business or get into a new market. But what I advise people is to never let it become your entire business, right? Because then you're not the decision maker in what could happen. And a third party could go out of business. A third party could be acquired, and then those leads are taken away and given to whoever acquired the business, right? To me, it's again, a painkiller versus, a vitamin workout regimen is a very different way of taking care of your vessel.
Proactive lead generation versus passive lead generation, going out there and earning it versus going out there and buying it, basically. And the other thing you said, which is really great, hopefully the listeners got that, because it's so unbelievably important, is building your castle on land you don't own never works out. And a lot of people who are building and this, I agree with, that's how, when folks ask Julie and I that same question about why our teams and brokerages struggling so much, it is because they basically are addicted to buying leads, and they haven't actually figured out ways to self-generate. And if you're
Well, I didn't answer the question fully, in the sense that I wear this hat a lot when I'm having conversations, because we need to always remember context, right? We're living through the second worst year consecutively in the last 35 years from a unit count. So anytime you build any business, it's a balancing act. So I actually have a lot of empathy for brokers and teams that, in 2021, you were supporting crazy amounts of volume. And in a short period of time, 24 months, to lose 40% of transactional unit volume is unprecedented. And so that's why I say it with a lot of empathy and respect, because I don't think a lot of them did anything terribly wrong. It was like, hey, we were serviced 2020 to 2021. It was like this steep increase, and you were supporting value to your customers, and then unraveling it at the same speed is something most people aren't built for. And especially if you take on long-term fixed liabilities in real estate, staff, and again, small businesses, it's something I have a ton of respect for, because I grew up doing it. But removing headcount, if you have 10 employees, by 3 is catastrophic, right? And so it's, what I tell people is, whether it's your personal financial situation or your business, scalability is a two-direction kind of lever. And when you think of scalability, people always think of up. But in lean times, and for people who watch our financials, over the last 8 quarters, we've taken out quite a bit of cost of the enterprise to match the market that's available. And it's a super careful balance of not breaking the service and value proposition, right? If you cut too deep and your value and service level behavior in response, support, all that stuff, and I'm talking agnostic of industry, you kind of cannibalize the golden goose, right? So you have to be able to support, a level of service that is competitive in the marketplace, while being able to be agile enough to scale up and down. Because scaling is always painful, right? If you're growing super fast, it's not a good experience. If you're shrinking super fast and outside of your control, meaning it's not that we were disproportionately hurt. Everybody was hurt across the board in the number of transactions and the agents count, right? If you're doing half the number of transactions, that's less transactional support. And so I think in this moment, Tim, there's probably a lot of teams and brokers who, weren't prepared or don't know how to maneuver the scalability down. And let's remember that a lot of these businesses are family-owned businesses. So like you're deciding which cousin to fire. That's a tough situation to be in. So I always remind people to have empathy because we are in unprecedented times from the lack of transactions.
No, I agree 100%. We've had, you've been on a lot of these calls that we're doing with these brokers and these teams. It is fascinating too. A lot of these teams and a lot of these brokers are going to, even these huge brokers that we're in conversations with thousands of agents, the principals and a lot of times even the core group of folks that run that business are going to be vastly better off financially. And even from a personal lifestyle perspective, moving over to eXp. And I also agree. It is interesting how it's probably maybe 30% business decision based purely on the spreadsheet. And a lot of it really truly is emotional because a lot of these are, generational brokerages where the brokerage is, as far as profitability, have just, it's gone down and down and down. And, maybe the fourth generation that's running it now is not as enthusiastic as, the first was. And so they're looking for a graceful exit, but they don't want to feel like they failed and they don't want to feel like they let down the legacy. And so that's one of the cool things that Glenn built into eXp, which I don't think people clearly understand. eXp is not a franchise. I'm sure this is how I explain it. It's almost like the operating system for your existing real estate business. And we essentially make it so you can focus on what you're going to be best at. And if you're a big broker and you want to move over a big team leader, we remove most of the liability too from a transactional perspective. And so a lot of folks are looking for a graceful exit, or maybe more precisely, the next natural step in the evolution of their business. And that's what they're discovering with eXp. Whereas 2 years ago, they would have been like, I'm good. And now they're all like, well, let's have that conversation and see how the numbers mash out. And the thing is, Leo, to your point too, that the value prop that eXp offers is only going to become more salient as the market condition changes with regards to the consternation that's in the market over the buyer agent litigation stuff, some of the stuff with TCPA, commission compression, blah, 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 blah. All those things are going to cause more folks to want to have that conversation. And I love what you said too. It is really important to be compassionate to the folks that are essentially going through this stress, because many of them are going through more stress, right now, personally and professionally, than they ever have in their lives before. So these are all really incredible things. I'm really thankful that you're bringing all this up. So when you're talking to some of these big brokers and you're talking to some of these big teams that are transitioning over to eXp, and again, this kind of goes back to the fact that you sold real estate before, and you're explaining to them that you've been there, done that, you understand what they're up against. Again, we've been on these calls before, so I've seen where they have a sense of relief. That's kind of like an emotional reaction because you really do feel what they're feeling, isn't it?
Well, so I would, I always like to find comparisons that I've seen in life before, right? So after the financial crisis, TRID came out and significantly increased the manufacturing costs of mortgages. And it put a lot of small and pop mortgage companies out of business, right? I truly think that just the way the market has responded and reacted and shifted, whether it's commission compression, price compression, just required or expectations of technology bundles and services, it's getting harder and harder to be a small independent. So either you're very small and it's kind of a team rich, but to jump to then be a profitable brokerage where the principals aren't actually participating, right? So a mega team becomes a team rich, to then becomes an indie, to becomes a large independent is kind of the sequence that I've witnessed in my 20 years. I think it's going to be harder for that to transpire because of the inherent cost per transaction, and now competing with brokerages like ours that are actually super efficient, right? If you look at our financials, you compare us to the legacy companies, we do what it costs us to clear a transaction from take a cost divided by transactions on a quarterly basis. But I can geek out on like SG&A and all that stuff, but just super high level, take the cost of doing business divided by the number of transactions on a monthly basis, and you divide by. We are 8 to 10x more efficient than the legacy models. Now, when a team manager or a small indie wants to scale and they have to compete with models like ours, and we're not the only one, it gets harder and harder to become profitable. And that's the beauty of our model, is that if you so choose to help us grow the business, we have 50 cents of every dollar that we invest into folks who help to scale the business. And I actually just, when I got here, I kind of looked at that. It's like, hey, it's a better, more aligned version of a franchise, right? Franchises, it feels like the franchisee and the franchisor are adversaries versus partners in the sense of how they get compensated and who's at risk for what. This model is truly aligned in the sense we're on the same side of the table, and if one of us eats, the other one eats, and it's truly aligned in that regard. And where I see that sense of relief that you're describing, because you're on a lot of these calls with me when we're talking to small or mid-sized independents, is that truly, if you look at their God-given gifts, was actually to pour into people and to teach people. Like a lot of the folks who've been successful in real estate at scaling independence is because they're truly leaders of people. And the way I position it is that we're a platform that allow you to grow whatever size business you want. Give me the headache, regulatory, transactional part of the business, and I'll allow you to go pour into human beings, and that seems to be their best skill set anyway. And in most cases, like you said, once you get rid of the fixed long-term liabilities in both real estate as well as human capital of team members, they actually net more money with us, become not only financially free, but location free, right? Where they can spend many months in other locations and not be physically tied to one location, because now they can pour into people way outside of their geography, right? Someone could be attracted to your form of teaching and coaching and training in any part of the country and also the world.
Yeah, 24 different countries. Well, it makes me think of Carrie Shaw. I mean, Carrie did 732 million in 2022, I think it was, or something. And she was absolutely not interested in eXp, completely had a closed mind to it. And then she lost some of her key agents to a competitor, a traditional brokerage. They just got up and left one day. And she was like, obviously that's very devastating, because she'd spent years with these folks training them up, and now they left. And then she had the epiphany when we were talking with her about eXp. Well, had those agents stayed with eXp, even if they left me, we would still be partnered in their future success, and I would still be wanting to invest myself. And so it totally changed the context of the reason that she is, so effective at what she does, but it changed the context of the nature of the relationship she had with the people that she hires to be part of her team. And I don't think people quite understand that. And that's the thing that's the emotional part. When, we had this call the other day with this big brokerage with over 1,000 agents, and you were talking with him, and and then you saw the light go off in his eyes. His big fear was losing his agents to his competitor. That was the thing that it had driven him for 20 years. And now he realizes, well, if they stay at eXp and they move to a different country or, state, I still am going to be getting a benefit of having trained them, had them made them be efficient listing agents or whatever. That changes the rules for everybody. It really does.
Oh, I had the same conversation with an independent earlier today. And I basically said, I see the sequence of a lot of team merges who are indies, right? Because I think most small, I'm talking under 50 agent team or indie are really team merges. And he actually said, I have 80 agents, 50 of them are on my leads program where I generate the leads, and 30% are pretty independent. And I said, think we're the perfect platform in the sense that you can actually attract a brand new agent, teach them the business through your team and your lead system. And the progression and the path is for them to leave. That is the way this is the way we do the business. This is the way I did the business. This is the way some of the most successful team leaders I know, they joined a highly productive team, got good habits and discipline, and then went and did it themselves. But, where I used to do it at Keller Williams, I used to train all these people who either left and went, stayed in Keller Williams or went somewhere else. And then there was no real ROI on my investment in them, versus we would encourage you to stay at eXp and become a full capping agent, become a team leader. And then that ability to pour into them never goes away, right? They're still welcome and included in all your trainings. And maybe they don't have access to your leads anymore as a true team, but they have access to all your mentorship and your collaboration. And it's plus.
I'm writing down this quote from Charlie Munger. Show me the incentive and I'll show you the results. People always talk about being agent centric and being collaborative and all of that. But when you really have the people's financial, everything's in alignment financially, it really does. It changes the time space continuum as far as the real estate brokerage model. And there are some competitors that are offering revenue share, but EXP's revenue share, especially with the, revenue share 2.0, really is the most generous revenue share program that there is for real estate brokerages. I don't want to necessarily talk a lot about revenue share right now, but the reality of it is that once somebody gets it, they can't unget it. Once you see it, once you understand it, it's going to change your life, because it really does change the context of how you think about your real estate business. You were talking about the natural progression, individual agent, small team, large team, scaling it on up. Now, I think there's going to be a completely different career path that people can follow, where they're going to be doing all the things that you said, but at the same time, they will have built their EXP, revenue share group, because they'll have done it through, like some of our biggest groups at EXP, they've built their groups off their teams, which frankly is a great business model. A mega icon team, all those agents are in part of your revenue share group. They start recruiting. And so this creates a financial path forward. And I guess that's actually I could spin this into a question. It's some of the folks that we've been talking to have been in their 60s and their 70s, and some of them younger. And because some of them have been through these two major cycles, the housing crash and now this. And I think in a lot of ways, I think you might agree, Leo, this is actually more challenging than the housing crash was. I think this time right now is. But they don't have the steaks in the freezer that they would hope to have had at this point in their lives. And revenue share, when they're opening their minds to it, can essentially make up for lost time and lack of maybe, net worth otherwise. And when you really focus in on that, you can do that in 2 or 3 years. You can actually create enough passive income that you're rich, where your money's working for you and you no longer work for your money. I mean, I get excited talking about it, honestly, because it's so much
Yeah,
fun.
the way I look at it, especially for folks who have built a real asset over decades, it's a really interesting monetization opportunity where they're not done in one and done, right? Like in a traditional acquisition, you get a lump sum, and finding a return on investment on that is hard, as you've learned. And the beautiful thing about real estate is you don't ever have to kind of give it up, in the sense of pouring into people is not something you age out of, right? So if you've built a independent brokerage, my guess is that you're a pretty, big-hearted human being who likes people. And so by joining us, we have a pathway to monetize that upfront and residually without ever giving the keys away, right? There's still your people that you get to pour into, and there's some exponential growth that comes with it. And I would find it hard to replicate that kind of monetary benefit.
Yeah, well, for sure. Not just in the brokerage model, but any business model. Without selling a bunch of equity, without essentially diluting, your control of the company, the whole thing. But the opportunity at eXp to build essentially truly passive income it's astronomical. It just truly is.
But
So,
it's disproportionately better for the folks who've already done it for a decade and need to monetize this opportunity.
well, since you mentioned that, I will say that you're absolutely right. But you can build, there's been a number of people that have come to the eXp who had influence in the industry prior to being at eXp, and some of them have done really, really well, and some of them haven't done anything at all. So it just depends on what your mindset is about your willingness to, get back in the muck and actually build. I mean, Julie and I joined
Well,
in 2019, and now we've got almost 4,000 agents in our group.
but I think it's a choice too, right? Like there's some folks who choose to come here and just sell houses, and
Yep.
it's a great number of folks who are here because I truly believe we're the best platform to service that business, from our technology to our support to our infrastructure, right? And it's no different than, to me, when I was at the other company, for the folks who were team leaders and then became franchisees, and decided to do that at a high level, right? So but the beauty of it is if you make that choice, it's asset light, meaning you don't need $300,000 to $500,000 in a verifiable bank account and sign a 10-year lease and then hope it works, versus, hey, you have the same opportunity that Tim and Julie have, and you have the ability to leverage Tim and Julie, if they're in your organization, to help with that. And I don't know how many businesses you have the opportunity to make an extra $500, $1,200 a month, right? And some of my favorite rev share stories are actually not the ones that get to your size, Tim. It's the folks that tell me how they just made their car payment, or
Oh,
the
me
folks
too.
that tell me that made their mortgage payment, and it's like, oh my God, this is meaningful.
Yeah. Oh no, I love that too. When you get a little message from somebody, and like the first time they get revenue share, And my favorite one is when they get revenue share and they don't know what the heck it is and they think it's a mistake and they're wanting to know how they can report it. Like, I've gotten this amount of money for like 4 months in a row. I'm not really sure what it is. What should I do? Send me a screenshot. It's revenue share. Well, you remember Bob, who you sponsored? Turns out Bob now sponsored 5 other people. It's just awesome. It's truly fun. But it's a great platform for, even if you don't have any outsized influence in the industry. We've known plenty. Well, again, I said I wasn't going to talk about revenue share, but here we go, right? If you look at the top 50 revenue share earners at eXp of the roughly 90,000 agents we have, you probably, agents, you haven't heard probably of any of them. They're not famous people. They're just people that buckled down, or they're people that had influence, or they, are in their local market. And then one person knew one person who knew one person, and then it really expanded. And also, eXp has changed so much since Julie and I got involved in 2019. The biggest question we had back, I'd say 50% of the time, the biggest question we'd have in 2019 is, what's eXp? Now everybody knows what eXp is. So there's really only two kinds of agents out there. Is there the agents that are ready to join eXp, or those that are eXp curious, because everybody knows what eXp is. And that's the big change. And the other thing you'd hear sometimes is, well, eXp is not good for teams, or eXp is not good for luxury. Well, guess what? We have some of the largest teams, and so the highest, transaction, by dollar volume that's happening in the country are happening through eXp agents. So all that's changed. So yeah, I'm incredibly excited, and we feel incredibly blessed to be with eXp, and I know you do too. And Julie and I were beyond thrilled when, frankly, you got named as the CEO, because you definitely have, what it takes to get us through this rough patch. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that I asked you before I hit the record button, because it is really, I'm curious, genuinely. So you have to deal every day with deciding which fire you're going to put out, right? But at the same time, you and Glenn, primarily, I'd assume, have to focus on really downrange, right? You have to focus on where the biggest opportunities are. So, during the greatest fortunes of men and women are made during the greatest times of change. And we're in one of those times now. So everyone talks AI, everyone talks about all these different types of things. So how do you, just from a personal perspective, how do you do that? How do you focus on the here and now and all the squeaky wheels, and at the same time look at the horizon?
So that's a great question, which I told you I was comfortable talking with once you hit the record button. But I think it, like, the behavior and like the sequence that I've gone through in my brain to learn how to do that applies to the agent doing 5 deals a year. And now I'll kind of walk you through how I did that in my brain. Um, a question I used to get asked all the time is like, how do you make your first hire? And I say to people that it typically is not who you think it is. Like, once, like, either you're doing real estate part-time or full-time, it goes to, what is your time worth? And you can do an exercise by taking your 1099 divided by 2080, which is what the labor department says is an actual year of work. And that number should be your starting point as to what you delegate out first. And in real estate, I always tell people it's probably domestic help. It's someone to do your laundry and do your dishes on a Saturday for the, flat fee that you could then go show 2 or 3 more buyers or take a listing appointment. And if you take that practice of like, what is your time worth? You can actually do all that all the way to your first admin assistant, to a buyer's agent, to a processor, to a listing partner, all the way to where you're creating a 7-figure business. And in that process of like knowing what it is you deliver value to the enterprise, right? Because when you are the team leader rainmaker, I would say that until you give that piece up, you should be the one prospecting and setting appointments and creating the appointments, because that's the most valuable thing. And then when I've transitioned into leadership in other businesses, it's understanding what moves the ball forward. So here, it's no different. It's just a much bigger number of, how do I move the ball forward for the enterprise value? And enterprise value to me is both short-term and long-term, right? So, and I would say that that's the hardest decision I make every single day. And when Glenn hired me originally, he told me, I'll never tell you what to do, right? Like, this is the large bullseye we need to hit. And I think that's how you grow businesses. You hire self-motivated, self-managed people who understand the bigger vision. So on a daily basis, I very consciously live in the dirt and the clouds. And the dirt is the stuff I need to do today, no matter what. So like right now, it's making sure that we are operationally prepared for the shift from stuff as tactical as scripts and buyer presentations and a one-page form in English versus legalese, and calling the associations and MLSs to ask how are you going to be enforcing this? Who you're going to enforcing this? And I'm doing that personally, right? Like I'm reading this stuff, I'm role playing this stuff, and I'm talking to agents very forward facing, from 2 to a couple thousand, depending on the format and venue. And then the long term is, yes, we are going to be in a tech enabled world that only squeezes out efficiency. And, how do we get our unit economics down from X to Y? How do I cut that in half? Because, if there is commission compression, which we touched on, the way to maintain profitability and service levels to get more efficient, right? We are rolling out 2.0 of our chatbot with 28 unique expert personalities and functionalities that we built. And V1 was one, right? So, the cool thing of how you accelerate technology is it's exponential, right? Going from 1 to 28 is pretty crazy. And I can only imagine what we'll do for V3. But to me, it's also sequential, right? So 3 years ago, I'm sure you remember everyone telling us how the whole world was moving to the blockchain or an NFT protocol. And now it's just AI, LLM. And I live in Miami, so I kind of feel it at an order of magnitude more annoyingly. But my answer is it's all of it, but probably not as fast as you expected. And then over time, much faster than you thought, right? So you have to be tasting, you have to be learning. I use ChatGPT every day. And I use it conversationally. And like I just finished doing my master bath. And the picture that ultimately I gave to the cabinet maker, I designed inside of ChatGPT because I couldn't find one online. Where I gave it specific measurements, I gave it prompts, and what's in my bathroom today, I designed with AI. But is it going to replace the agent? No, but it's going to replace the agent. The agent who uses AI is going to replace the agent that doesn't use AI. Over time. I don't think it's overnight, but it's faster, stronger, better. And I would, and as ludicrous as it sounds now, when I was a 22-year-old principal broker of a Keller Williams office, I remember debating an agent who told me she was not going to get email or a cell phone, that the fax machine and the landline were perfectly good enough for her, right? And so, in hindsight, it's easy to laugh and think of how ridiculous that is, but I think that's what technology does. It just speeds things up, right? I think mobile sped real estate up completely because once upon a time we had to be sitting somewhere to pull a listing or send somebody a listing and print it out and then hand write in a paper and push hard through white, yellow, and pink, and then fax, versus now it's all done digitally, and it compresses the time of a transaction can happen in.
Yeah. So managing people, you've obviously been put in the CEO role during a time where there's an unbelievable amount of arrows being shot from all directions. When you walked in with an existing, staff, and, I don't know how you're gonna answer this question, but again, I'm curious, so I'm just gonna ask a question I'm curious about. And it's you have to be constantly looking to upgrade systems, processes, but also staff. So how do you go about judging when it's time for maybe to, advise someone going a different direction that you really need? Like, how do you look, what do you look for in lieutenants and generals to surround you so you can get more done faster?
So I feel unique and grateful that I've been on a leadership journey since I was 19 years old, right? So I hired my very first assistant 6 months into getting my license, and I think it's an active kind of curiosity that I've always had into leadership and how the brain works and psychology of how to manage people. But I spend a lot of time and have spent a lot of time understanding what makes people tick, and there's all kinds of data that shows that the most productive and capable team members are the ones who feel recognized and fulfilled. And there's very psychologically good data that shows how that happens. And a lot of it's through autonomy, right? So if you have folks that are organized and have a legitimate seat at the table and co-creating goals and where we're marching towards, they feel ownership in that process. So like in my management style, we meet regularly, and I'll lay out the problem we're trying to solve, and it's not a this is my decision and you better get there, right? Like if you share a KPI, and this goes across industry, across business, if you give somebody a goal that they didn't co-author with you, it feels like, well, Tim said I have to do this, versus, hey, I came up with the number, right? Like when I was a team leader or a office manager and somebody says, I would ask them, what do you want to make next year? And they said $150,000. I said, great. What's your average price point? Do you do buyers or sellers? What is your source of of transaction business or lead flow. And I said, great. I reversed engineering it back to, in order to do the 150,000 you said, Tim, I need you to make 8 calls tomorrow. And you need to do it, this many days out of the year. And I think when you co-author goals and or processes with people, it's very easy to hold them accountable to something they were part of. And once you do that, I think that's how you find out if you have the right people around you, right? Or are they willing to be a co-owner or co-author in the goal? And then you create a metric from a leadership standpoint to hold them accountable to something they said they're willing to do. And when they don't, it's pretty self-evident.
12 months from now, what will everyone be surprised by about eXp? Like, what will be the thing that everyone's going to be going bonkers about because they didn't see it coming? What excites you the most?
Yeah, what excites me the most is leveraging our size and articulating correctly, right? So I think for the longest time we have been letting other folks tell our story, and again, it comes from how we were built originally, which was bottoms up, and so a lot of the storytelling is not been on purpose from our end. So I'm very actively trying to make sure that we narrate our own story, and leverage and highlight what already is there. Right, we're the single largest monolithic brokerage on the planet, and that's an amazing stat in both transaction count and agent count. So globally, we're 87,000 agents, 511,000 transactions in 2023. That's just like a ridiculously large number. And then in the US, we're 70 some thousand agents with 355,000 transactions. That's 40% bigger than number two, like 100% bigger than number four, 6x bigger than number six. I mean, it's meaningful and huge numbers, and those facts lead to other facts, in my opinion, that we have this most and brightest team leaders, individual producers in the country, and that translates to me that we have a very hard value proposition to replicate, because it doesn't matter if you hit copy paste on our website for our values and our systems and our processes. You don't have the humans we have, and I'm talking about the agents as well as leadership, as well as all the folks who've stepped up and pour into other people. And so we're finally harnessing and just telling the facts, putting the people that are amazing on display, and making sure to intentionally tell that story. So 12 months from now, I think 12 months from now, we'll be in the middle of a disaster, because most companies aren't prepared for the shift, because the shift comes in, August, and there will be 6, 12, 18 months of fallout. And I think we're uniquely positioned, just like we were in COVID, right? We were already virtual and scaled. The fact, I think it can't be said enough, the size of our company with the efficiency that we have at this moment in time cannot be replicated. And so in moments of turmoil and shift, people can talk a big game, but at the end of the day, can you close the transactions? Can you support the agents? Can you give them broker support they need? Can you hold their hand? We're just the superior model.
Well, consolidation. That's what I bet you. That's what it feels to me. Like all the people where I'm good 2 or 3 years from now, all those brokers and those teams, they're all starting to have those conversations because they realize that this August thing is a big deal. They realize this TCPA thing with lead generation is going to be a big deal. They're seeing the referral fees for, the platforms go through the roof, and they're all the things. And so the consolidation that's going to happen in the industry and the number of agents that are going to rush to eXp. And it is bonkers how well positioned eXp is for that. No debt, we don't have all these sort of this inefficiencies of having a franchise model or having 6,000 brick and mortar offices that, are going to, in a lot of cases, ruin a lot of businesses. So it is incredible. Yeah. So
100%.
I agree. I'm incredibly optimistic, and I know you are too. So, and really,
100%.
and really, the combination of you and Glenn is kind of like a perfect dream team. Well, Michael too, everyone, but you and Glenn are kind of like the yin and the yang, I think, with how your minds work and in terms of competitiveness, in terms of like seeing that, like Glenn is definitely a big thinker and a downrange thinker naturally, and he's not afraid of bringing things into conversations. Like when I interviewed him, the things he would bring in, it's like I had to, I always felt like I was having to play catch up when I was talking to him. It's fun, honestly, it's interesting. So Julie and I certainly feel blessed, and yeah, we're in the right place at the right time now. It's all up to all of us to take the right actions. So listen, Leo, we ran over, but I really appreciate your time today. Anything else you'd like to say to folks as we round the bend?
No, I've had the best experiences through the most chaos, right? So it's always context and remembering that, right? I tell people, think of 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the worst experience. Now you kind of either remember it fondly because it's funny in retrospect and in context of how insignificant it was to your moment today, or if it was extremely painful, like surviving illness or anything like that, it probably was a very formative experience that kind of made you who you are today. And so when you're going through some horrible stuff, which a lot of people in our industry are experiencing financially and through fear of the change, kind of tie back to how a previous experience like that made you better and stronger. And I feel like that's always a good context anchor that should give you a little bit of pause to not freak out so bad.
Yeah, and don't wait. That's the main thing too. Don't wait to explore what the options are as far as what other, where you want to be in a year. There's a lot of people that at housing crash, they're still experiencing, still experiencing the financial downsides of, they're still waiting for housing to crash again, all these things. People get stuck in the past because it was so emotionally harmful to them. And that's happening again right now. But it doesn't have to be that way. There's every reason to believe 12 months from now, depending on the decisions you make today, you're going to be on so much a better trajectory that you can't even imagine. Dream state types of scenarios if you make the right decisions. But don't wait. Don't wait to be desperate. Don't wait to find out that there's going to be a lot of confusion. There's going to be a lot of people that don't know which way is up. At least explore what your options are. Is this what we're suggesting to a lot of folks, especially in the podcast. And we're incredibly excited too, seeing all the new blood, frankly, come into the industry. People that don't have to unlearn things, who are just going, okay, tell me how to work with buyers. That's exciting too. So yeah, it is great. I've always kind of wondered what it felt like to be in the right place at the right time. Maybe in our past, I'm sure in our past we've experienced that, but this is definitely what it feels like. So, Leo, I certainly appreciate sharing this moment with you. And thank you, Glenn, for making him the CEO of eXp. We all vastly appreciate it.
Great seeing you, my friend.
Thank you, sir.